The function f is defined by f of x maps to 2 minus 2 cos of 4x. For x values greater or equal to minus pi over 2, less than or equal to pi, and is represented by the graph y equals 2 minus 2 cos of 4x. Part 1, identify the horizontal midway line, the amplitude, the range, and the period of this graph. Part 2, is the orientation of the curve about the midway line normal or inverted? Give a reason. Part 3, using this information, construct the graph of y equals f of x for x values greater or equal to minus pi over 2, less than or equal to pi. Part 4, starting with the standard cosine graph, y equals cos of x, outline a sequence of transformations that will map this graph to the graph y equals f of x. Part 5, use the graph of y equals f of x to find all the solutions of the equation f of x equals 3 for x values greater or equal to minus pi over 2, less than or equal to pi. Now I've drawn out the graph, so the blue graph is cos of x, or a section of it, and the red graph is 2 minus 2 cos of 4x, and it's in between minus pi over 2 and pi. But in the question you would not be given this. But I've just drawn it out to show the difference between cos of x and 2 minus 2 cos of 4x. Okay, so let's start working through the questions. So we need to, first of all, remember all our rules for sinusoidal graphs. So considering the sine graph, y equals a plus b sine of cx, and the cosine graph, y equals a plus b cos of cx, where a, b, and c are constants and c is greater than 0, these graphs have the following properties. The midway line is y equals a, so the a value being the number after the equals and in front of the sign. The orientation is normal if b is greater than 0, and inverted or flipped upside down if b is less than 0, so the b being the number that's stuck on in front of the sine or the cos. The amplitude is going to be the modulus of b, so the positive value of the b. The range is going to be a minus the modulus of b, comma a plus the modulus of b. And the minimum is going to be a minus the modulus of b, and the maximum is going to be a plus the modulus of b. And the period is going to be 360 degrees divided by c, or else 2 pi divided by c if working in radians, with the c being the number that's stuck on in front of the x. So this is very, very important. I would suggest learning this off by heart, but you're going to have to look at it to work out any questions like this. Okay, so part 1, we're going to identify the horizontal midway line, the amplitude, the range, and the period of this graph. So I have our sinusoidal graph summary drawn in here, just so we can have a look at it when we are working through the question. So the graph is y equals 2 minus 2 cos of 4x. And if we have a look at our cos of x formula, we have y equals a plus b cos of cx. So the a is the number in front, so the 2. So we're going to have a is equal to 2. The b is the number that's stuck on in front of the cos. So we've got minus 2 stuck on in front of the cos, so the b is equal to minus 2. And the c is the number that's stuck on in front of the x. So we've got a 4 stuck onto the x, so the c is equal to 4. So the first thing that you want to do is identify the a, b, and c. Okay, so we're going to start by finding the midway line. And in our summary table, we have the midway line to be y is equal to a. And since we identified a is equal to 2, if y is equal to a, then y is equal to 2. So the midway line is y is equal to 2. Next, we're going to find the range. So if we have a look at range, the range is going to be a minus the modulus of b, comma, a plus the modulus of b. So if we have a look at our formula, the a is the number that's stuck on in front, that comes just after the equals. And we identified that as 2, a is equal to 2. And the b is the number that's stuck on in front of the cos. And we already identified that as minus 2. So the a is 2, the b is minus 2. So we end up with 2 minus 2, comma, 2 plus 2. Because remember, we're interested in the modulus of b, and the modulus of minus 2 is 2. So that's how we end up with 2 minus 2, because there was already a minus in there. And that's how we get 2 plus 2 over here, because there's a plus. And then 2 minus 2 is 0, and 2 plus 2 is 4. So the range is 0, 4. So next we're going to figure out the period. So we can see from the table that for the period, it's 360 degrees divided by c, or else 2 pi divided by c if we're working in radians. And we are indeed working in radians. So again, if we look at our formula, the c is whatever is stuck onto the x, and we identified that as 4, so c is equal to 4. So for the period, we have 2 pi divided by c, which becomes 2 pi divided by 4, and 2 over 4 gives us a half, so we get pi over 2 for the period. Next, the amplitude. So we can see from our table that the amplitude is the modulus of b. And in our formula, we see that the b is stuck onto the cos of x, and we identified the b as minus 2. So it's going to be the modulus of minus 2, which is going to be 2, basically just the positive value of minus 2. So we end up with the midway line as y is equal to 2. The range is from 0 to 4. The period is pi over 2, and the amplitude is 2. Part 2. Is the orientation of the curve about the midway line normal or inverted? And give a reason. So if we have a look at our table, we see for the orientation, it's going to be normal if b is greater than 0, and inverted if b is less than 0. And we know that the b is the number that's stuck on in front of the cos. So if we have a look at our function, the number that's stuck on in front of the cos is minus 2. So remember, b is minus 2. So the orientation of the curve about the midway line is going to be inverted because the b is less than 0. Minus 2 is less than 0. So the orientation is inverted, which means it's been flipped upside down. Part 3. Using this information, construct the graph of y equals f of x for x values greater or equal to minus pi over 2, less than or equal to pi. So we need to use the information that we just gathered. So that information is that the midway line is y equals 2, the range is from 0 to 4, the period is pi over 2, the amplitude is 2, and the orientation of the curve about the midway line is inverted because b is less than 0. So what I've done is I've drawn out y equals cos of x and y equals 2 minus 2 cos of 4x, but I've actually drawn it out much bigger than is needed. And if you see this black box, that's showing the graph that is needed. So we were asked to draw the graph between minus pi over 2, which is here, and pi, which is here. So I want to just focus in on the black box. So we know that the midway line is y equals 2. So this is the line y equals 2. So we can see that that cuts right the way through our red graph. The range is from 0 to 4. So we're going up as far as 4 on the y-axis, down as far as 0 on the y-axis. The period is pi over 2. So this is 0, and this is pi over 2. So we need to have one building block of the cosine graph. Now remember, it's inverted, it's flipped upside down, so that's why the U shape is now kind of an N shape. I know it looks a bit pointed, but that's just because it's quite squashed in, but it is meant to be more so an N shape. The amplitude is 2. So if this is the midway line, then 2 above it is going to be the maximum point of the graph, and 2 below it is going to be the minimum point of the graph. And the orientation of the curve is inverted, which means it's flipped upside down. So that's again why it's N-shaped as opposed to U-shaped. So what we see in the black box is the section of the graph that we needed to draw. So if I wanted to draw this out from scratch without using a calculator, I would probably actually start off with having a look at whether the graph is inverted or not. So I need to know if it's going to be normal or it's going to be flipped upside down. So what I've drawn over here is a very rough sketch of what would be one period of the cosine graph, or one building block. So the first thing I know is that it's flipped upside down, so the shape will actually be more so an N shape. Then I would think to myself, well, what's the period going to be? So how stretched or how shrunk is my graph going to be? So the period is pi over 2, and I'm going to start at 0, because I know that the range goes from 0. I'm going to do an N shape up as far as 4, because I know that my range goes up to 4, and the N shape back down to pi over 2. So this is what I would start with, this section of the graph here. And once you've gone from 0 up to 4, then you automatically have your midway line in the right place. So once I have one section of my graph, or one building block, I would just add on another one to the right and another one to the left, so that I go as far as minus pi over 2 and up as far as pi. It doesn't mean necessarily that you always add on one on either side. It depends, of course, what they ask you in the question. So in the question they wanted from minus pi over 2 up as far as pi. If they had asked up as far as 2 pi, let's say, you would have had to add on 2 more of the N shapes. So again, I would probably start with the fact that the graph is inverted and flip it upside down. Obviously, if it's not inverted, you stick with the general cosine shape. Then I'd probably have a look at the period. So I'd see how far across in my graph I need to go, starting at 0. And then I'd see, well, where's the range? How high up do I need to go and how low do I need to go? And that will automatically give you the midway line in the right place. Once I've drawn in one of the building blocks, then I can just add on as many more as I need.